we're going to talk about a very, very important topic about small for gestational age babies and particularly what happens to them over a long term. Now, we all know that there are a lot of short term implications which are there in SGA, particularly with regards to hypoglycemia, with regards to perinatal issues, but there are a lot of long term issues, especially with regards to growth, with regards to development, with regards to puberty and obesity, which are there. So today we are going to go through a lot of these issues and try to focus on key aspects of evaluation and management. And as in many parts of pediatric endocrinology, we need to have a careful mix of regular evaluation and preventive measures to avoid long-term complications. So this will be the discussion point for today. And we will be discussing the entirety of key endocrine issues that we are seeing, particularly with regards to the SGA babies in that perspective. Now, as we know that SGA, there are a lot of implications, particularly with regards to growth, and we'll see how there is a dichotomous pattern in terms of when one group of individuals will grow a lot, and that will cause more metabolic complications, while the other may not grow at all, resulting in short stature and other complications which are there in that regards. So we'll discuss about that in detail. All of you can go and have a look at our website, learning.growsociety.in, which has got a lot of information about pediatric endocrinology, including courses in pediatric endocrinology. And we have recently launched our book, which is available both as a paperback as well as a Kindle version as well. Now, the SGA is typically a twin story, and this is one story which I'll highlight, is a typical story which starts off at birth. So we have got one group of individuals who remain short throughout the time. The growth remains low. Then they turn to have early puberty, resulting in a compromised final height. So they are short and healthy, but there is another group which may actually have a rapid catch up. So they start to grow rapidly, and then subsequent to that, they will look tall, they will look healthy, but then they will develop a lot of metabolic complications, and this will result in a tall, unhealthy phenotype. So within SGA, there are two basic parameters to look at. One, which would be short and healthy, and the other will be tall and unhealthy. So as pediatric endocrinologists, as pediatricians, as gynecologists, we have to make sure which way this particular child is going and try to manage it accordingly in that perspective, and that becomes important from that regard. So this is a major challenge with a dichotomous pattern, and growth is definitely affected in that perspective, and this is something which we need to be quite cautious about in that regards, and a lot of metabolic consequences are there in that situation. Now, SGA is a common phenomena. If you go by just statistical definition, that will be 2.5%. But as we are discussing, because we are talking about a situation which has got complications, the figures will not just be statistical. We have to correlate it with many other complications. And if you look at it, it will depend upon the nutritional status of the mother. And of course, SGA will be more common in resource poor countries. Now, out of these, 10% remain as short adults. And therefore, if we talk about India as a broad perspective, we have at least 50,000 short adult SGAs which are there every year. So it's a huge population burden. Most of these are not identified at the right time, and this has huge implications in that perspective. So as I discussed, there is an issue about balance in SGA. There are individuals who are having slow growth, and they will land up short, while rapid growth will cause metabolic complications. So I think what we'll emphasize is which individuals are likely to progress towards metabolic complications and which are going towards short stature, to how to identify them at the right time. So we're going to talk about three major endocrine effects of SGA on longer life, on growth, puberty, and adiposity. And these three becomes very, very important from that regard. So we'll start off with growth. Just a bit of word, as already has been discussed briefly by Naveen, is that the major regulator of intrauterine growth is actually IGF-1, with a minor effect of IGF-2 in that perspective. Now, growth hormone produces IGF-1 by its effect on the liver, but in the fetus, it is not that important, and that's why you can have GHT, you can not have any pituitary, still the birth size will be normal in that setting. Now, this IGF-1 will mainly act on the type 1 IGF receptor. Now, remember, type 1 IGF-1 receptor is not an IGF-1 receptor. On this receptor, IGF-2 can also act and insulin can also act. So it's type 1 IGF receptor, not IGF-1 receptor. And this causes cellular growth. And this we discussed that this is which form of receptor? So it's a tyrosine kinase receptor which will increase glucose uptake through the IRS pathway, and then there is a MAP kinase pathway which will cause more mitogenesis and cellular growth. Now this IGF-1 level will depend upon how much is the IGF-BP as well. If your IGF-BP level goes up, free IGF-1 will become less in that situation. Now, parallel to that is insulin, which is again binding to a similar tyrosine kinase receptor, which is the insulin receptor. This is mainly acting towards increasing the GLUT4 activity, allowing glucose intake with a 5% effect as far as growth is concerned. So this becomes important from that perspective in that regard, and it's mainly controlling that. But it also has an effect on the type 1 IGF receptor. So if your insulin levels are high, like Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome, like in the setting of somebody who has infant or diabetic mother, you will have macrosomia. If insulin is low, like neonatal diabetes, you will have IOGR in that perspective. One of the most severe forms of SGA would be ones who have got no body fat, and they will have hypoglycemia followed by hyperglycemia. These are rare. You didn't mention about that. What will be the most likely cause there? A newborn who presents to you with hypoglycemia, then hyperglycemia, on examination severely emaciated, no subcutaneous fat. Yes, what do you call them, lipodystrophy? Or what's the cause? It's not really lipodystrophy. It is like you don't have any fat, but what type of lipodystrophy? So this is basically severe insulin resistance. So if your insulin is not working at all, you will have this most severe SGA which can present. So SGA, of course, neonatal diabetes, but these are very, very rare. That's why you didn't put up, but you need to remember those perspective as well in that regards. So insulin is also acting there, and IGF-1 is acting in that perspective. So the intrauterine growth, therefore, is regulated via a number of factors. And the features which happen in this setting is that the IGF-BP level goes up in malnutrition, and that's why your free IGF-1 level will be low in that regards. The second thing is that there is a growth hormone resistance. Now we know if you have malnutrition, there is growth hormone resistance, which is a normal phenomena, so that you have all this lipolysis happening and allows you to have energy which is there. So what will happen is that there is a growth hormone resistance which is there. Growth hormone levels are on the higher side. So growth hormone is there, it is not able to work. As soon as you go into a good environment, this is ready to catch up. So as soon as you give them food, they will catch up a lot in that perspective, which will happen. So if you just summarize what happens to the GH-IGF-1 axis in the SGA setting is that the growth hormone levels are high in the fetal period, but they are not working because of the resistance which is there. There are alterations in terms of the IGF-BP level as well. There is a postnatal surge which happens, and in most cases, the GH resistance will improve, but some of them will not respond. And the third major factor is that their puberty happens very quickly, and that can cause a problem in terms of rapid growth causing fusion in that perspective. And of course, this is, as discussed by Naveen, a classical case. You can have syndromes. It could be Silver-Russell syndrome. It could be some of those insulin resistance syndromes or the chromosome breakage syndrome. So this is most important to identify in that perspective. So now what we'll do is that we'll invite Dr. Sayan, who will talk about the growth pattern of SGA and how we can identify and evaluate them at the right time.
Now going forward with the growth issues in SGA, a growth in a SGA baby, as with any other case of a AGA baby or in any other baby, is that growth happens in 3 phases major. It starts off with the intrauterine phase, thereafter leading into a childhood phase of growth, after which puberty occurs, and thereby the child reaches its adult height. Now, what happens in these children in the intrauterine phase is that in the first trimester, the main functions of the body are to increase the cell numbers. So if any insult occurs very early in the first trimester, the main problem which occurs is that the total cell numbers get decreased, which results in a symmetric SGA. Now, what is the symmetric SGA? Is that, as already talked by my previous speakers, Dr. Manoj and Naveen, is that the head circumference including gets affected. So here, the head circumference, length, and weight all are affected in these cases. And these represent the most severe forms of the spectrum of SGA, and they have very less chances of recovery going into adulthood. Now, when the child goes into the second trimester, the body says that I have to save the brain. So the brain is saved primarily, and thereafter, via the duration of the insult or via the severity of the insult, the weight and the length both can be affected. And these thereby represent the moderate end of the spectrum. Now, finally, coming into the third trimester, if the child has any insult which occurs in the third trimester, it is just as if acute malnutrition or any acute illness that has occurred in any child or in any adult. The body responds here by again going into an asymmetric SGA, but here mainly the weight is affected. So these represent the mildest end of the spectrum. So if you talk here, those child getting affected in the first trimester will have the least responsiveness to any forms of treatment and will be the shortest. And the child which gets affected in the third trimester represents the mildest spectrum and will be the most responsive to treatment and will have the most better outcome. Now, coming into the physiology and pathophysiology of intrauterine growth retardation, as just talked about by Dr. Anurag and mentioned by Dr. Naveen, is that very early in the fetal phase, the IGF-2 comes into play. Now, the IGF-2 comes into play is the IGF-2 difference with IGF-1 is that IGF-2 isn't majorly concerned about the ambient environment. It decides I have to first build up the structure, and when the structure is made, it gives up its action to IGF-1 and insulin axis, who thereby, according to the ambient environment, decides about the growth that can occur in the fetus. Now, when an insult occurs, as just mentioned by Anurag sir, is that various epigenetic changes occur. Now, epigenetic changes are that the genetic code isn't changed, but the expression of various genes are changed. And these lead to IGF-1 resistance and GH resistance, as just mentioned by my previous speakers. Now, this GH resistance also lasts after the child has been born. Now, how does the child who has suffered an intrauterine insult grow after he has born? Now, the early phases of growth, it has been seen, is that 80 to 85% of term SGA who are born have a rapid catch-up. And these children catch up and become less than 2 SDS within 12 months. After that, 5% of children catch up by 24 months. Now, these again represent the ends of the spectrum. So milder cases catching up as rapidly as 3 months, and the 5%, as I mentioned, will catch up by around 24 months. Now, 10 to 15% of cases lack any catch up. And this was a very good study done in Sweden, which followed up all term singleton pregnancies from birth till 18 years of age. And they found that this 10 to 15% children who fail to catch up to 2 years, if they are followed up into adulthood without any intervention, this percentage still remained at around 7.5%. So this lot, which fails to catch up by 2 years of age, you need to actively think about any intervention which you might be able to give to them to improve their final height. Now, the preterm SGA is a different ballgame here altogether, because as you can already imagine, a SGA with growth restriction, and now this child has been born preterm. So his extrauterine body apparatus is not conducive to the extrauterine environment at that point of time, and various forms of illnesses can occur in a preterm SGA, which leads to again a later catch up. And it has been seen that preterm SGAs can catch up to as late as 4 to 5 years. Now, coming to the point which has been given by the Latin American consensus is how do we then monitor these SGA children? So coming to monitoring, is that it has been suggested that we monitor these SGA children every 3 monthly for the first year. So that is 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and 12 months. We monitor every 3 monthly. And thereafter, we monitor every 6 monthly. So what do we monitor for? We monitor for head circumference, we monitor for weight, and we monitor for length. Now, as has been mentioned by all my previous speakers, is that weight is important. As during my residency, I used to only mention the birth weight of a SGA who was born, because I never knew what is the implications of his length. Now, henceforth, after learning from this SGA module, is that the length is equally important for any SGA child, because what you can do here is that you can sensitize his parents that this child can land up short, so he needs to be regularly monitored for the same. And what is the importance of weight here? Because if any SGA child rapidly catches up weight and crosses centiles very fast, as will be discussed by Dr. Pratik, is that he can land up to various metabolic complications henceforth. So here is the importance of monitoring weight along with length. So any SGA child who fails to catch up by 2 years, remains less than 2 SDS, we need to evaluate. So what do we need to evaluate? Is first we need to evaluate for all the general conditions that we evaluate in any child who is not being able to grow, that is failure to thrive. So all the pediatric conditions which can lead to malabsorption, diabetes, renal tubular acidosis, and any genetic or chromosomal conditions. So now coming to the pubertal issues, as already mentioned by my previous speakers, is that these children have been seen to have puberty which is starting early. Now, this doesn't generally mean that the child will be labeled as precocious puberty, but for the height, the child's puberty starts earlier. And as will be mentioned by Dr. Pratik after this lecture, is that these children have huge chances of precocious adrenarche. Now, precocious adrenarche delivers huge amount of sex steroids. These sex steroids make bone maturation very fast, and the bone maturation here is accelerated. These children reach peak height velocity very fast, remain at that peak height velocity for a very short duration of time, and develop menarche, which is earlier. So a short child going into puberty earlier, having a very small duration of accelerated pubertal growth, and having menarche earlier. So you can very well understand a short child with compromised pubertal growth, again landing up short as an adult. Now finally coming to the odds ratio of what is the odds ratio of a SGA who was SGA for weight versus a SGA who was SGA for length, they landing up short as an adult. So it has been seen, according to the French paper, is that those who have SGA for weight have an odds ratio of 1.7 versus those who have SGA for length having an odds ratio of 5.9 times landing shorter.
So this is again your asymmetrical versus symmetrical idea.
So this is again that thing that acute malnutrition and chronic malnutrition both have different outcomes. And that is why for a SGA, with mentioning his weight at discharge, we should always mention his birth length. It has also been seen in this French study is that men land up around 7.5 centimeters short, females around 9.6 centimeters short, and this on an average is 1 SDS below his mid-parental height.
What about preterm versus term?
So preterm data is not that much available, sir.
But they are more likely to be.
Yes, sir.
So I think you've really nicely summarized a lot of important factors as to what really regulates growth and what the pattern we expect and when should we be bothered in terms of evaluation. Now we know what has happened. Now what do we do in that perspective is the big question. So this is what has clearly been highlighted by Sayan, that if you see there is always a catch up growth in SGA and a catch down growth in LGA, which happens by around 2 years of age. By that time, you should really be in terms of according to your parental expectation. If you're not doing that, there is something wrong in that perspective, which becomes important. Now, the big question is whether premature versus term baby have a differential outcome. And what we are seeing is that the preterms take a longer time to catch up. And this is what we've been talking about. But this study is very interesting. What this shows is that with time, even the preterms are also catching up. So they may be late in terms of catching up. And that's why we talk about 4 years in terms of their catch up. They will also catch up in that perspective. Although their outcome and growth hormone responsiveness will be different in that perspective. But basically, we need to be cautious about in this regard that there will be issues in that. They will have a long-term outcome issues with this, which is noted in that perspective. So preterm babies have longer time to catch up, and this will be difficult to catch up in that perspective. Now, if we go back now to this girl who presented to us with growth failure, boy, 5 years of age, with a birth weight of 2.1 kgs. And what you can see, the child is very, very short now. So do you expect this child to grow, Manoj?
So now up to the 2 year it can be adaptation. Now it is going to.
So even if we say nutritional issues, even if we say prematurity, even if we say, let's say in Indian children, they will catch up a bit later, 5 years is too late. So this child is clearly short. We need to do something. Otherwise, the growth is going to be affected in this perspective. I would, of course, love to have information about his birth length, his head circumference, but often this is not available. You will just get a SGA who now has this picture. So this is clearly not catching up. So what do we do from that perspective is important. So what we'll do is that we are basing this consensus statement which is there, which is really looking into the various aspects of SGA evaluation and management, which has to be considered in that regards. So the most important part is to exclude other causes. So if you have a short SGA coming to you, you have to look for a number of other systemic diseases. So you have to do the basic workup, complete blood count, liver function test, electrolyte, blood gas, as Sayan was saying. Of course, if you have a SGA who looks like Silver Russell, a lot of this workup can come down. So it will depend upon if you have an identifiable syndrome, you don't need to be that aggressive, but otherwise you should do this basic workup. And nutrition is very, very important to assess. So you have to do a proper assessment and advise. And if you feel that the child is malnourished, maybe wait for some more time would be what we recommend in that regards. Very, very, very important. And this is why I emphasize that, because most of this, once you exclude this systemic illness, will land up for growth hormone. You have to look for contraindications in that regards. So Fanconi's, Bloom's, ataxia telangiectasia. So all these features have to be also evaluated in that regards. And that becomes very, very important. There is no role of a growth hormone IGF-1 testing because it is a pharmacological indication. It's not a physiological replacement which happening in that regards. The dose is higher. So with growth hormone, we say 25 to 50. We are talking about 35 to 70. I'll talk a bit about the dose responsiveness and how they grow, but it is a bit higher compared to GHD. And the expected growth, you have to be very, very clear that do not expect miracles when you're treating a SGA child. The typical growth is 1 to 1.5 centimeters additional growth per treatment year. So if you treat for 5 to 6 years, expect 6 to 9 centimeters extra growth, somebody landing around 1. And that's what you said was the deficit. So if the deficit is, you will be able to cover the deficit, but you will need 5 to 6 years of treatment. It's not like a shortcut. It's not like a growth hormone that you have given growth hormone in 1 year, they will grow 15 centimeters and then 10 centimeters. That's not going to happen. So you have to counsel them about that possibility. The good part is many of them are small in size. So you can easily treat them and their weight is not too much. So the dose requirement is not very high and the cost is also not very high in that regards. There are also non-oxological benefits, which I'll talk about in terms of body composition, in terms of bone strength, in terms of physical activity, which are also there, but they are not the basis of treatment. You treat only for growth, not for getting a bit more head circumference or a bit more physical activity from that regards. Now, there are two different ways in which growth hormone treatment is indicated. US is much more aggressive. So it basically talks about 2 years. Don't wait beyond 2 years. And if the height is less than 2, forget about everything, you can give growth hormone. European strategy is more balanced, and I think we should prefer something like that. Wait till at least 4 years. And we have seen many of our children catching up a bit late. We don't have information about terms also and all those things, so it is always better to wait till 4 years of age. And height SDS less than minus 2.5. So the more they are away from the lower limit, the more likelihood they will not respond. So that's why height minus 2.5 is better, and then growth velocity. So they are much more comprehensive. What it would mean is that if you use these criteria, you will be treating many more children. And what we want to do in resource poor countries to treat only those who actually deserve it. Otherwise, you'll start treating, as I said, 50,000 children will meet the criteria every year in India. And when I recently did a review for a particular group which were treating these patients, they found that the numbers were very, very low. They were not even 1%. So not everybody who may quote unquote meet these guidelines requires treatment. This is another message. So you see short stature minus 2.1 SDS, start growth hormone. I would not suggest that. The more severe they are affected, if at 5 years they are minus 4 SDS, go for it. Otherwise, maybe you can wait and watch also for some time. So you have to have a balanced approach, which becomes important in that regards. So it has to be individualized, and severity will determine the major perspective in that regard. Now, dose is an important factor in growth hormone, and we know that higher dose is always better in most cases. But when we really look at the randomized trial of 70 versus 35 microgram per kg, there may be initial good response, but then the response is not very significant. So 70 would mean the cost is double. So even if you're using 35, I would say you start off with 35 and see if the response is not good enough, then you increase. Don't start with a very high dose, because there is a variability in terms of GH responsiveness. And we have discussed that some of them may have GH resistance, some of them may have IGF-1 resistance. So in some, giving more GH will work, but if you give too much GH, it will not work if you have a IGF resistance in that setting. So start with a lower dose and then you carry on building. So typically you have a 12 kg child, you're talking about not a huge dose, 1 to 1.2 units will be sufficient. So the cost will be less in that regard. So this is the study, again 0.23 to 0.46, which is 35 to 70 if you talk about daily doses in terms of the responsiveness. Now, how much do we gain? And this is a big study which followed them up till the final height. And what we are seeing is that there is a benefit which is there. And if you look at the meta-analysis, it is definitely the forest plot is towards the right side, which means that there is a benefit of GH. Of course, you need to have a benefit, but that benefit is to the tune of around 1. If you see, this is 1 standard deviation. So you were saying 1 standard deviation deficit, 1 standard deviation benefit. So that is what you should think about. Not a huge improvement in that perspective, but reasonably good to get them in the lower limit of normal range they will happen. So 35 to 70, as I discussed, is the dose. Start with 35. For 6 years, expect 6 to 9 centimeters of gain in terms of height. And this has to be told. So again, it is a pharmacological dose. Again, higher dose, as I discussed. Start with 35 and then you can build up from there. Now, one often happens in our setting is that people cannot continue growth hormone for a long time. They say, I want to give for some time, then stop, and then maybe 2 years later, I like to give. So this was an interesting study which was done quite some time ago, which compared 2 regimens in which they gave 1 year treatment off, 1 year treatment off, and then continuous treatment. So what they found that intermittent treatment had a lower responsiveness in terms of growth hormone responsiveness. So there is no role of intermittent treatment. I would say if a child has come to you young and he is really short and you are sure he's not going to grow, start treatment then. Because if you treat after 4 years, his weight will increase, the cost will increase. And then you say, whatever time you are able to treat, treat it. Minimum for 2 years. If you can treat for 3 years now, treat it. Don't say I'll treat for 2 years now and then 3 years later I'll treat again, because then the cost will be more, responsiveness will be less. So it has to be a continuous treatment and not a discontinuous treatment to achieve a good outcome in that regard. And that's very, very important. Now, if these all are coming from some of the randomized data, but the randomized data is not huge in these settings, we are talking more about the data which is there from databases. So this is from the KICK study, and this is very important because it really looked at the effect of growth hormone in preterm SGA versus term SGA. And what they really found out was that there was not a very significant difference in terms of preterm versus term responsiveness. So preterms will take longer time to catch up. So you wait for a longer time, up to 4 to 5 years. But if you give them growth hormone, they will have a good response, which will happen in terms of their growth. So they don't be too worried about in that perspective. Now, when they followed these up in terms of final height data as well, again, there is some difference between term and preterm, but still the final height is similar. So this clearly means that don't say that somebody who is preterm, we should not give growth hormone. They will benefit slightly less compared to term, but they will have a definite benefit which is there in terms of that. Now, this is again a very interesting study. This is again from our database which looked at the follow-up of different growth hormone conditions, especially in the setting of ISS, SGA, MPHD, and IGHD, along with SGA, to see how they respond. And what we see here is very, very interesting. This looks a bit confusing. I'll just summarize it simply, is that the best response out of this category would be for which one? GHD, SGA, MPHD, and ISS. Who will be the best? What are you thinking? GHD, of course. But who is number 2? SGA. And if you see, SGA are pretty close to GH responsiveness. So although we are a bit pessimistic, but if you select appropriately somebody who is really short, they will respond much better than Turner syndrome. They will respond better as compared to MPHD. Compared to ISS, they will respond well. So they are number 2 in terms of responsiveness. Lesser weight means lesser cost. So if you talk about cost benefit ratio, you will have a good response happening. So this is a very interesting data which suggests that individuals with HCA have a good improvement as far as the growth is concerned. Now, the other flip side of it is what do you expect the IGF-1 level to be? Who will have the highest IGF-1 level?
Sir, highest IGF-1 level before starting treatment?
After treatment. So, of course, this is a pharmacological treatment. So, you want your IGF-1 to go up. So, what you see, IGF-1 levels were not that low in SGA. If you compare these 4 groups, they had the highest to begin with. They were low, but they were much higher than the GHD. Then you treat it, they become high. So now the concern is that whether this high IGF-1 can cause, because IGF-1 causes tumorigenesis, and that's why the whole concept comes in, whether this is going to be harmful or not in that perspective. So just to summarize this answer and Nodinet data, which basically tells us about large real world experience in terms of growth hormone, it tells us is that SGA is number 2 in terms of responsiveness to GH, though IGF-1 levels are going up. So whether this is going to cause harm or not is something which is there. This is another very interesting thing, which really looked into whether this IGF-1 is going to do harm or not. So when we said IGF-1, we know that IGF-1 is bound to IGF-BP. When we do growth hormone, what happens to IGF-BP?
Growth hormone IGF-BP will increase.
Increase. So effectively both IGF-1 and IGF-BP increases. So the free IGF-1 may not rise to the same extent. So what they really looked at is that individuals who actually, if you look at in SGA, you don't have an increase in a bioactive or a free IGF-1. So it is not to that tune. So the risk of malignancy and everything will depend upon free IGF-1 and not just on IGF-1. So this means basically is that there is an increase in IGF-1, but that's total IGF-1, but this does not cause a lot of problems. So this is an important message in terms of safety of GH. Now there are prediction models which have looked into what determines the responsiveness to growth hormone. So what could be the positive possible factors, Naveen? Which children will respond better to growth hormone?
Type 1 GHD will.
No, SGA.
Those who had a maternal placental cause.
So they will automatically respond. So I'm talking about short SGA, you're given GH. What do you think would be the responsive factors? Like, let's put it this way. If the parents are tall, they will be taller or not? If you give higher dose, if you treat for longer. So these are very logical situations. So what they found out was based upon this, they developed a prediction model. But if you look at it in terms of growth hormone level, do you think growth hormone level will have an impact? Because it is not a physiological one. In GHD, it is important, but not in SGA. They found that the parental height being high, you will respond better. If you give higher dose, you will have a slightly better response. And if you treat early, you have a better response. So the mantra as far as SGA is concerned, pick them up early. You will have lesser dose, better response. So why do you wait? So once you are sure that you will give him GH, give him now. Don't wait. The other way around is that if somebody is just borderline, don't rush towards that. And the greater the deficit between the child and the parent, the higher the response will be there. That is another corrected height SDS, which will give you information about that. Now, adverse effects, Pratik, what do you think will be higher in SGA versus GHD? Yes. But if you compare GHD with the SGA with the Turner, who will have the highest adverse effects? Turner would have higher because they have an intrinsic bone physiology problems as well, and they tend to have bigger results. So edema is common, but that's basically because of fluid retention, because of protein retention. BIH is more common as compared to the GHD, but not to a huge extent, 1 in 4,000 treatment years. You can, of course, unmask hypothyroidism, which happens, SCFE, which happens in any rapid growth condition. So if you have a child on GH, complains of a hip pain, knee pain, limb, think of slip capital femoral epiphysis, which is important, very important issues. What do you expect to glucose intolerance? Will it improve or decrease? So generally speaking, growth hormone is considered to be a diabetogenic hormone. It's a counter-regulatory hormone. But studies have clearly shown that not a single case of type 2 diabetes has been reported. Some initial transient changes in insulin sensitivity may happen. So there is no need for routine monitoring as far as all these parameters are concerned. Baseline, you can do a fasting glucose level and a lipid profile, but not on a routine follow-up. And tumorigenesis, as I said, the bioactive IGF-1 is not increased. If that is not increased, the risk is less. So overall, it is safe, slightly more acute effects as compared to growth hormone therapy for a GHD condition. Now, very importantly, there are other benefits as well. Studies have clearly shown that bone density improves. There is improvement in terms of head size, in terms of cognition, in terms of motor response. But these are not your primary treatment indications, as we've discussed earlier. What about Russell Silver? And this is what I asked with Naveen in that perspective. Especially if you have hypomethylation, the responsiveness becomes lower. Otherwise, the response is reasonably well. So when you think about it, if you have a problem in the IGF-2, basically they would have a responsiveness because then you can build up the IGF-1. But if you have a problem on cyclin-dependent kinase, there will be a problem in that perspective. So again, the imprinting effect also comes out here in that regard.